Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the public hearing for the Smart Schools Investment Plan on Monday, February 8th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, item number 3.1, public hearing.
Okay, well, we're going to try to keep this brief. Everything that you're going to see here tonight is the same information that was presented on January 4th with a couple changes. And that has to do with what you see here on the screen, which is entirely to do with wireless access points. We submitted the draft plan to the State Education Department for a preliminary review. And they shared that by having those access points in there, we would have to initiate a building project in order to secure those access points with Smart Schools Bond Act money. And that requires some significant time and expense to do that. So you'll see in a few slides the solution, which was quite simple. That second bullet, using general fund dollars to purchase those while we use Smart Schools money to pay for additional Chromebooks and interactive boards. So I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to keep this brief, but this is a public hearing, and it's possible that the folks that review the Smart Schools Investment Plan will ask for a link to the board meeting information. And so we do want to follow through with the public hearing. So I'm going to move ahead to a few slides where we're simply going to show, we'll start with the timeline. And so you can see here that we're on February 8th, where the Board of Education holds a public hearing to enable stakeholders to respond to the preliminary plan. So we've completed all the steps prior to that. Tonight on the agenda, we'd be seeking the Board of Education's approval of the Smart Schools Investment Plan. Excuse me one second. Just admitting a few folks to the meeting. Assuming the Board of Education approves the investment plan tonight, we'll post it on the district's website, where it will remain for the life of the project. So we technically need to keep it on our website for roughly 6 years. We'll submit the plan to the State Education Department and hopefully receive approval by August of 2021. This is essentially the plan, the investment plan. So we've highlighted in yellow the items that will be purchased using Smart Schools dollars. We mentioned previously on January 4th that this is a multi-year plan. And so we're seeking to exhaust the remaining balance of our Smart Schools money by the 2026-2027 school year. And you can see here in this area, where we've still listed the access points to be purchased in the 2023-24 school year. Those access points will be purchased using general fund appropriations that are shown down here in the bottom portion of the screen. And actually, we've identified they'd be purchased through BOCES. And that brings us to the end of the public hearing. We'd open the floor for questions. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay, if there are no questions, then we can go ahead and close the public hearing.
Okay, resolved that the public hearing be adjourned. May I have a motion, please?
Motion, Janine.
Second, Christine.
All in favor? Aye. Patty?
Hi, Janine.
Aye, Christine.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Mike.
Okay, motion carried. Public hearing is adjourned. And now we move on to our regularly scheduled board meeting. So, Mrs. Brantner, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good to see everyone tonight. I'm doing our usual COVID-19 update and the impact on our schools. Fortunately, we're seeing a little bit of a reprieve with cases. I think last weekend was the first weekend that I've had in a long time where I had no case. So we are seeing a slowdown, hopefully not just in Marcellus, but in lots of places. Vaccinations are still rolling. I know lots of people have gotten their second doses, and some that signed up later are starting to get their first doses. You know, we're seeing sort of a mixture. Some folks are having a reaction to the second dose. You know, that usually lasts maybe 24 hours. Some are having no reaction at all. So it's a little bit of a guessing game as you proceed in to get your second vaccine, what will happen. Nevertheless, I think things are continuing to go smoothly for staff as they get their vaccination. I had sent an email probably maybe a week ago to some of our county officials. And it's a sort of a long story how I got to that, but we had some discussions with them a couple of times with our regional superintendents group, asking for them to look at some of our quarantine guidelines. And for me, the ask was based on the fact that we've had, with all the quarantines that we've done, we've really had no transmission at all in school, 0%. And you know, I'm a rule follower, and I'll quarantine all day long if it's keeping people safe, because that's obviously my priority. But I feel like it's become following a rule that really isn't having any impact. I don't think I'm keeping anybody any safer. And come to find out, there are other counties and areas of the state that are taking a less aggressive approach and aren't really experiencing any different dynamic than we are. So I had requested that in my email that they take a look at the quarantine guidelines, especially comparing them to some other regions of the state. And if other regions of the state are having the same positive outcome, that why could not that apply to Onondaga County? And of course, initiated the possibility as well of changing the social distance to be a less distance so that we could welcome more kids back to school. And certainly don't expect that to happen right away, but I felt like it was worth putting out there. And, not anticipating that I would hear anything, but we did actually receive some new draft guidelines from the county today that I think respond quite well to some of the things that I've asked for. And I think will greatly reduce the number of students that need to be quarantined. And I have every confidence that we will still be keeping the same number of students safe, because I think that the practices we're using in our schools are working. We were supposed to have a meeting today to discuss these new guidelines, and unfortunately something came up for county officials, and that's rescheduled for tomorrow. Obviously, we'll still be doing a lot of phone calling. We'll still be asking families to monitor their children, especially if they had some contact with an infected individual. But I continue to remain extremely optimistic that it will create less volatility for students in terms of disrupting their schooling while still keeping students safe. So more detail to come once we've had that meeting with our county officials, but definitely an exciting thing, I think, for our students and teachers and staff. As you know, last week had some craziness with our first significant winter snowfall, but we did launch our practices on Thursday. I tried to do some checking in with people. I know Mike did as well, and I would say the resounding theme was joy pretty much everywhere you went. The kids are just so thrilled and grateful to have an opportunity to just be together and do something. I guess I would say I think our coaches needed this opportunity as much as the kids. I have a saying I used to tell my own kids, you can't appreciate what you've always had. And I think our kids have really had an opportunity because they've lost some things to gain a newfound appreciation for things they once took for granted. So hopefully we will be successful at keeping COVID at bay with the measures that we're taking. But at least for however many days it lasts, we're going to have some happy people. So I appreciate your support for the kids and for these programs. I know it's a risk, and we all go into this with a little bit of fear, not sure, because COVID has certainly taught us no one knows what's going to happen. And you just have to make a decision and hope and pray that you're doing the right thing, because you just don't know. And I think I can say so far, I think we have served the Marcellus community well as a team. We've been a good team with the things we put in place. And I have no reason to think that the initiation of these winter athletic programs will be any different. We're gearing up to do our weekly testing. We did get a form for parents to sign. I just want to make sure that parents haven't missed in all of our messaging that participating in these sports comes with weekly testing for our athletes here. Not every school district is doing it. It's not required, and it's not required in every county. And but it is here. We felt like, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. We felt like administratively that this was the best way to protect our academic program, that if we could make sure that if there were some asymptomatic individuals, that we found that out before we ended up bringing them into schools, we'd probably be well served on the academic side. So what will happen is that we're actually using the county's testing rider, if you will. We're testing as their agent. We don't have sort of our own testing set up. And Mr. Free will actually be going to do the pickup of the kits. There's a chain of custody that has to be maintained. So it's sort of an official process. You have to go to where they house all of these items. They have to know who it is that we're sending. He'll have to sign off exactly how many kits he's taking. And then we'll replenish, weekly, and we have to account for all of the tests. And I think this is so that people don't think, oh, I've got a few extra tests, I can use them, on a family member or something. They have to be maintained that way. And our county is one of the only ones who is providing us with their supply. They're not charging us. And I think that's one of the reasons that some of the other counties are not able to do testing, because they can't incur the expense. So this week we'll be testing on Wednesday. We originally planned to have testing happen on Mondays, but actually next week, with Monday being a holiday, we may be testing on an off day again. Mr. Free is putting together a testing schedule. Obviously, the season only has 4 more weeks in it. So we'll put together that testing schedule so that parents know what days testing is and what time students need to be where. So during the testing process, we'll have 2 to 3 swabbers so that we can work through this quickly. And then I will be working with someone on the administrative team to check the results and to log those results on a spreadsheet that has to be uploaded the day that tests are done in a special portal. So it's quite a detailed process, but I don't think it'll be terribly difficult. So as I mentioned before, we really had to spend some time talking about the purpose for testing and what we believe about testing. So we go into this recognizing that a test result is only as good as the date and time that it was taken. And so it's going to give us some information, but it's not a replacement for all the other important practices that we need to have in place. Kids wearing masks and, the sanitizing and all hand washing, all of those things are more important than the testing that we'll do in terms of keeping folks safe. So as I mentioned before, Cortland County is one of those counties that their county would certainly sell test kits to the school districts, and school districts just aren't in a position with everything else that's going on to purchase the kits. But honestly, our testing program isn't about the other school. It's really about making sure that we're keeping things clean on our own teams. So I don't have a big fear of playing against a school that isn't testing, because I know if they tested 5 days prior to coming or 3 days prior to coming, the tests don't really give me any added security or protection. I'm not going to give those tests more weight than they have. I mean, they are what they are. So, I want to be transparent that I still don't have a good sense of folks that are testing and aren't testing. I think there's probably going to be some districts in Onondaga County, that are still contemplating what to do. And there's a good chance that the officials will not be testing. I think that their union is taking a position. It will be very difficult for school districts, even if there is a will for them to test, for us to test them, simply because they're assigned sometimes at the last minute and they show up sometimes at the last minute. So we actually had a meeting last week and we're working through some of that. I'm not sure exactly where it will land. I do know that we have our first games this Thursday and Friday, and I think we'll still be in a very good position to play those games. The one thing that we're holding firm on is that we will not be traveling to other school districts that are inviting spectators in. And the reason for that is just increasing the exposure of our kids to other, I'm going to say, random people, which maybe sounds a little bit harsh, but if we're not having our own parents come in as spectators, we certainly aren't taking our kids to school districts that have spectators. So I actually had a conversation with the superintendent today and told him we'd be happy to play them, but if they're allowing spectators, it would be happening at our school. And I think that's going to force schools to rethink their policies and recognize that this is a way that we can sort of just protect our kids in our schools by just holding a line on how many people are coming into your facility. So that's sort of what's happening with sports. I guess the other thing is that we had talked last time a little bit about modified sports, and we actually had a meeting, Mike Free and Katie Cook and I, just to discuss, did we see logistics being any different? And we still feel like, obviously, until things get going, we may realize that the things we put in place aren't quite as perfect as we imagined, but we see things working in a very similar way. We had talked a little bit about, will there be more of a challenge because of students needing rides from their parents, but we still feel like we can manage things with good communication between coaches and families. Fortunately or unfortunately, the season is pretty short. So it's not like you're talking about, usually a winter season is, months long, and, it's a lot more complicated, I think, but hopefully things are going to work fairly smoothly. So I don't know if anybody has questions relative to all of the COVID updates I just gave before we move on.
Michelle, I have one quick question.
Sure, Janine.
So a question that I've been asked by some parents is, okay, so with the new guidelines coming out, and I know that process still has to be reviewed and adapted. I've been asked a couple times, do you think that there would be any chance that for this semester, for the rest of this year, at any point, do you think anything could change significantly enough that we would resume 5-day-a-week classes?
Oh God, that is my prayer. It's hard to say. My hope, and again, I'm an optimist, so those of you out there that are pessimists, be forewarned. I felt like I needed to be a voice for the Marcellus community, if nothing else, but for students everywhere, if it relates. And I felt like we needed to start pushing at least on the quarantine requirements that I feel like people set in place in good faith, but now data proves that they're excessive. And so I wanted to first push that we address that. And I think that ball was able to move because the social distance requirement is a hinge pin. That 6 feet of social distance is a real hinge pin in the quarantining process still. I think if we can continue to prove that school is a safe place and transmission is not happening, I did already float the idea of reducing social distance to 3 feet because I know there are locations outside of New York State where that's happening. And while I haven't done a ton of research, I have not heard, that states are in disarray because their social distance of 3 feet is taking down their schools. But I do feel like me mentioning that opened the conversation. And my hope is that that's a next step. I think if last year is any indication, if you talk to a teacher, they would have taken 1 day of having kids back in school. Just give me a day to see them and to have closure. And I really feel like we would all have that same position. If you tell us the last 2 weeks of the school year, we can have kids 5 days a week, we will take them however we can get them. So it is my hope that we could see, a potential for that. I will say that that might be a tad bit optimistic, but again, I'm going to continue to try to keep my finger on the pulse of how things are trending and make sure that we're still keeping kids safe. And if I feel like that's happening, I'm going to continue to push on that.
So with that, I imagine that would be somewhat of a logistical challenge to shift gears because classes may be offered that, in a different capacity because we have the virtual component. So just wondering, when teachers have to leave emergency sub plans, is there a plan, an emergency plan for if we are able to, or is that something that people will anybody have the time and energy to spend on that contingency if it should happen? Because I imagine it's something that couldn't happen quickly.
Our schedules were built, at least for the most part, for that eventuality, because I think we all hoped that in the spring, at least I did, I hoped, hey, in the spring, things will be better and we'll all come back 5 days a week. And, I'm less optimistic about that, but my optimism isn't gone. So yes, if we are given the green light, we will do whatever is necessary to mush the cohorts back together. And honestly, the virtual component is not insurmountable because we have spaces in school should kids need to go somewhere to take a virtual class, because it's still virtual, that we could certainly make that happen. So certainly our principals have been incredibly creative and flexible, and I have no doubt that we could make that happen if that comes to pass. All right. So, Madam Vice President, if you are ready.
Yes, I am. We're moving to the pandemic plan addendum to the district safety plan.
Correct. So I've mentioned this a little bit. Governor actually, I think in an effort to memorialize some of the good work that school districts, municipalities, businesses have put in place during this pandemic, it seems like a delightful time to add this component to our safety plan. And, as much as you don't need one more thing, the timing is appropriate because we're living it. So why not memorialize it? So I guess in that regard, it's a lot easier to build a pandemic response plan when you're responding to a pandemic. So just to give you a little overview, we were given legislation that included required components to this plan. And the components are quite a bit more wordy, but I've taken the theme that emerged in the components that are relevant to school districts and pulled them out in short phrases so that you didn't have to read paragraphs. So first and foremost, our plan has to include a list of essential and non-essential employees. The definition of essential means they must be in person on site in order to perform their job duties. So that means a lot of folks in schools will be classified as non-essential, which is, it's funny how people react when you tell them they're not essential. You know, it's a double-edged sword. So there's a lot of positions in a school district that we can function remotely if we need to. And so there has to be that list, and that's the criteria. You also have to put a justification for why the work that's assigned to that particular role must happen on site. So an example might be food service. If we're required to pack meals, which we have been during this pandemic, so we could transfer and say we will in others, food service has to come on site to prepare and package food for distribution. It can't be done from their homes remotely, obviously. So we provide the specifics about what the task is and the justification for why that must be done on site. We also have to tell how non-essential workers will work from home. So, you know, what resources do we put in place so that people can actually function effectively from their homes? We also have to have a section about how we will acquire PPE, including how we will maintain that supply chain. Obviously, acquiring enough for a month isn't going to serve you if your pandemic lasts a year like ours. So we will have to prove not only that we can acquire an initial amount, but how we see that supply chain continuing. We also have to include how we will handle exposures, which I think we've become very adept at. So that is now memorialized in our plan. And then how will you document hours and work locations? So if, for example, we have a timesheet system with employees that are working remotely, how do we document that they're remote, and how do we document the time that they've worked? So those are the major components. There were a couple of other components that have nothing to do with school districts. You know, one being how will we house displaced employees or temporary employees, which obviously has nothing to do with the work that we do. The plans needed to be shared with our unions. I actually sent that out as an attachment today, and they were given instructions that they can respond with comments or questions, you know, at any point in the next 30 days. And they're going to send all of those comments and questions to Tony, and Tony's going to organize them into a Q&A document, and then we'll work together. Jean, Tony, and I created the draft plan. So the three of us will work together to provide answers, and then we'll be able to put that out for all of our bargaining unit members across the district to benefit from. And any adjustments that we feel need to be made to the plan, either based on their questions or comments needing clarification, we will do that. The plan then needs to be posted at the beginning of March to our website for public comment. So we'll do a posting there with an explanation of how folks can turn in comments and to whom. And we'll use those comments to make any adjustments before the plan is adopted at our April meeting and added as an addendum to our district safety plan. You also received a copy. You have plenty of time to look it over. It is not lengthy. And again, it's sort of a memorialization of a lot of the things that we've done. So you'll probably be reading it saying, oh yeah, I know this is happening because we've talked about it. So like I said, a good time for us to memorialize those things. Any questions about our pandemic plan and how that will be rolling out?
Okay. Now we're moving on to budget planning update.
So Tony and I'm going to turn you over to Tony, but Tony and I are continuing to try to take in any new information that we get and put it out to you in a form that makes sense, but so much will still hinge on that final budget from the governor as we see what really what really might happen. As you know, we've gotten a lot more uncertainty in budgeting over the past year, but Tony is going to update you on our tax cap calculation, where our budget stands right now, and just a few tidbits about the COVID relief money. So here's Tony.
Well, folks, you should see the tax cap calculation on your screen. I will save you the torture of going through it in detail. If anybody's interested, they're welcome to give me a call about any of the details that you can see here. I only wanted to draw your attention to the area that's circled or highlighted in red, labeled A9950. We schedule each year a $200,000 transfer to our capital fund to do minor capital improvement projects. And that tends to be, adds to our tax levy limit. And so, as I said, we've carried 200,000 each year. If we were to leave 200,000 in next year's budget, it would drive our tax cap increase, our percentage increase, up to around 2.5%, which is, we believe, a little higher than you folks would be comfortable going for a levy increase next year.
Yep.
And so the solution is to reduce that number from 200,000 to 100,000, bringing our tax levy limit down to roughly 2%. That's the only change that we've had to our tax cap calculation in the last week or so. There were some other details that we received from other sources, and so we're now able to finalize that calculation. One note about this change, this decrease from 200,000 to 100,000, that's something that can always be restored either in next year's budget or in future budgets. But we feel that this is the most appropriate action to take at this time. As we've said in the last couple of board meetings, there's a process that we'll take you through during the budget process. There are some variables that needed to be finalized, and so that process is starting now. So up here at the top, we shared with you an initial budget on January 25th of $38,857,000 on the expense side, and revenues of $38,295,000 with an initial gap of $562,000. And so as we shared, as the budget process unfolds, we're going to address that gap. We're going to eventually get it down to zero. So these are the changes that have occurred since we last met on January 25th. Our health insurance premium is actually, it was estimated to be 4%. It sounds like the co-op is looking to adopt an increase of 5%. So that's the only negative impact to our budget situation, is that we actually have to add in roughly $35,000 in expenditures for health insurance. The other items that are listed here, including BOCES and their reduction in their expected year-to-year increase, a reduction in the retirement system contribution rate. We did receive confirmation that we are now exempt from the internal audit function, which will save us roughly $17,500 next year. This is just a movement of money. Kara Lux had indicated that she has a need for some software. And so we're going to move money from this code, which is a general textbook budget code. We're going to move that into Kara's area of the budget so that she has those dollars available to her and her teachers and her students. And then here's this $100,000 that I had mentioned to you that we're going to reduce that expenditure for the interfund transfer for capital projects. And then finally, that increase, that tax levy limit calculation of 2.03% adds roughly $6,000 to the estimated tax levy. And so we now have a gap of roughly $382,000. Michelle and Jean and I were speaking earlier today, and it's important to know that that number can change dramatically. We don't mean to portray doom and gloom, but we just want to be candid that given the circumstances surrounding state aid, we truly have no idea which way things are going to go. Things, as we mentioned at the last meeting, are heavily dependent on federal stimulus dollars. So depending on how that unfolds, this number could swing wildly in one direction or another. So a lot to happen between now and April 19th down here on the bottom when you'll finally adopt a budget. But we just wanted to share with you where we currently stand as of today.
Thank you, Tony. Anybody have questions?
There's
Oh, no, you're not done.
Yep, one small piece, which is just a reminder about that $1.4 million backfill of aid from the federal government. As we shared with you at the last meeting, this is a 3-year allotment. And so over time, between now and April, we're going to have to figure out how those dollars are used. And keep in mind, seeing the options that are here, this is also subject to change between now and April. The information that was given to us, of which this $1.4 million number was part of, that's the governor's budget. So when the legislature adopts its budget, and hopefully by April 1st, then we'll have better information for you. But for now, based on what the governor shared with us in this $1.4 million backfill of aid, if that were to play out and become part of the state's adopted budget, then we'd be looking at 3 options to consider about how to use this backfilled money. So more to come. As Michelle had indicated on here, we're working on cuts now, and depending on where that lands, that'll certainly help us inform our decision about how to use these dollars.
I want to go back for 1 second to Tony talking about our reduction of the capital monies from 200 to 100,000. And I want to make sure that you recognize we could keep the capital monies certainly in the budget. It would have an impact on our tax levy limit calculation, as he said, going up to 2.5%. And you might be saying, well, we don't have to go out to our voters with 2.5% just because we can, because that limit calculation, remember, is the amount that you can go out with for an increase in your levy, just getting a simple majority. If you exceed it, you have to get a super majority, but there's nothing to say that you can't go below it. I think what Tony is really making sure that he conveys to you is that if we leave the $100,000 in there, we need to go out at 2.5% in order to fund that. Otherwise you're just contributing to our gap $100,000 or close to it. You'll obviously raise some revenue on the tax levy, but it may not be everything that we need. So I just want you to understand that leaving it in there doesn't mean we have to go out at 2.5%. But from a fiscal side, Tony is saying we would have to go out at 2.5% because we need funding for the expense. So hopefully that makes sense. That's one of the reasons we eliminated it, is because we feel like it's not going to be very palatable at this time to go out at 2.5%. Hopefully that helps fill in a little bit for you.
Thank you. That's a good point. All right, we are on to building project update.
Yep.
You want to take the chair?
Yes. Well, I don't need to take the chair, but we are, if you recall, back when we did the project that we're currently in phase 2 of this summer, we floated a concept of funding projects and keeping up with improvements and repairs in our buildings using a process of debt replacement. And at that time, I told you, periodically over time, we're going to retire debt, meaning you're going to have paid off a mortgage, if you will. And that gives us capacity, budget capacity, to replace that debt. So yes, normally if you didn't replace it, you would use the money that you're not spending on that mortgage in some other way. But you also could just leave that money in the budget for debt service, for capital projects, and continue to use it for things that you need to have done anyway. So the next set of mortgage that gets paid off is coming very soon. And in order for us to capitalize on this debt replacement philosophy that we're asking that we continue to initiate, we actually need to start gearing up for our next project. Now, those of you who were on the board when we talked about this, the project that we're currently in, we actually did a review of the roofs in the district. Do you remember? We looked at the different roofs and the different buildings and the ages, and we said our next project is likely going to be replacing roofs and dealing with asphalt. So not terribly glamorous stuff, but necessary stuff. We're starting to see portions of the asphalt failing. If you don't know a lot about repairing roadways, I think we all should be experts because we live in New York State. So there's a lot of potholes in this state. And the reason for that is once you have a hole, once you have a pothole, you can patch it. But unfortunately, one winter is pretty much going to destroy your patch. Now you have a slightly bigger hole because the edges broke more, and you can patch it again, but next spring it's coming back. It's the same thing that happens on a school campus. You can patch, but eventually the potholes will become so large that they sort of sell themselves. You know, there's no question in your community that you need a project dealing with asphalt because there's more potholes than there's asphalt left. I hate to get to that point because obviously you can damage people's vehicles. It's super frustrating. People can get hurt, twisted ankles. So the time has come when we really need to start gearing up for a project. Tony has created more of his beautiful spreadsheets, and he can show us the specifics and the timing, but it looks like we'll need to vote on a project in December of 2021, which is this year. So that means we have to actually start gearing up now. So Tony?
Sure. So I'm not going to walk you through the details that are here. We just wanted to share with you folks and the general public that there is a planning process in place for anticipating when we would vote on projects. So you can see at the top that we're looking at votes that would occur roughly in December of 21, December of 2030, December of 2032, and December of 2033. And this is a common practice for districts to partake. It's quite important because of the property tax cap that we keep an eye on these things. So I'm going to jump ahead one slide so that we're just focusing on the project that Michelle just shared with you. So we know that the project should not exceed this $9.6 million number that's there. We tried our best to project what it would cost to resurface all of our paved areas and to re-roof all sections of our buildings, all roofing sections of our buildings that were replaced in, if I remember right, I think it was 1999. So we were looking at 25 years later, because that's generally the longevity or the lifespan of our roofs, that it's time for them to be replaced. It's a large portion of our roofing structure that does need to be replaced at around that time. So we're just giving you a heads up. Michelle is a master at messaging. It's important that you folks and the public expects this and knows that it's coming by the time we go out for vote in December. And so the facilities committee will help us along the way with messaging and vetting information. And that's it. That's all we have for you.
Okay. Anybody have any questions on that?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Tony, can you just explain, or Michelle, so I understand the concept of the debt replacement. And so that when something is paid off, it makes sense to take on another debt, to take on a new project. But if you could just remind me, what is the advantage of that? I remember you saying, and you
Sure.
mentioned something about the property tax, like why, and I know that a lot of districts are doing that, but if you could just explain why that's advantageous to the district.
Well, you have work that needs to be done anyway.
Yeah.
Because you can't keep up. I mean, we have more work than we'll ever be able to keep up with. But if we keep, chipping away at it when we have opportunity. So your goal is to not create wild swings in the wrong direction for your public. So think of it this way. We have capacity in our budget, let's say for a $172,000 mortgage payment. When that mortgage payment is paid off, every year we have some sort of a budget gap. You could just absorb that as part of the gap, because you would reduce your expense. So you would get closer to closing your budget gap. The problem is your facilities are continuing to deteriorate. So instead, leave the $172,000 mortgage payment in there, but actually take on a new mortgage so that you're not creating a wild swing like, oh, we're going to wait 5 more years. And now all of a sudden our tax levy has to go up, 4% because we had to do this project. And people are like, 4%? Are you kidding me? So this way it creates a leveling. It's not, we're not doing glamorous work at this point. We're just trying to keep our facilities up, just sort of the basic things that you have to do. I mean, if you're going to have a building, you have to have a roof that isn't leaking all over people and computers and so on and so forth. So what it does is it keeps things level and even rather than creating peaks and valleys.
That makes sense. Yeah. So it just lends itself to stability across the board. And then there's no giant surprises with huge price tags. That makes sense.
Yeah, that or, oh my goodness, the roof is literally pouring water. We have no plan we just waited until it had a catastrophic fail. I mean, that's a strategy. I've been in districts that waited till they had so many potholes that the community was begging them to do a project. That is a strategy. I just not sure it's a great one. I think we need to have an eye for when things are at the end of their useful life. Maybe they haven't completely failed, but we also, there's implications to waiting until things fail, especially roofs. Once you have water infiltration in a building, it eats away at the integrity of the structure, which we don't want.
Yeah. So like if you don't get your oil changed regularly, you end up paying for a whole new engine.
Correct. Great analogy.
In fact, Christine, on Wednesday at our facilities committee meeting, you're going to see that, you're going to get a walkthrough of that building condition survey. And that is the document that would in all likelihood be used to plan the 2032-2033 project. So yeah, there's a lot of effort that goes into school districts planning to maintain facilities. And and just one last thought before, so we can move on. Christine, if you remember a couple of years ago, we had a roughly 4.8% levy increase. And I'm sure those that were on the board at the time remember the debate over whether or not taxpayers could afford that increase. That was the second time, theoretically, that voters had to vote on the renovations at the high school. They voted to proceed with the project, and then they really had to vote again to garner the tax dollars to pay for that project. That's what we're looking to avoid. We don't want we prefer to not have a 4.8% levy increase ever again.
Right. From the point that you initially vote on a project until the debt comes on the books, it's 4 or 5 years. And so we found ourselves digging up the old materials that were used to explain to people to prove, you were told this. You were told that if we're going to do the high school, this is the implication. Unfortunately, it's like a delayed pain, if you will, because the day you're voting on it, it's the emotion of, oh my gosh, this high school really hasn't been touched, major parts of it since the 60s when it was built. And that carries an emotional component. Do I want my student in a science lab from 1967? No, I don't. I want them in a science lab from 2019. So unfortunately, when it comes time to pay the bill, we sometimes forget that part. So that's sort of what Tony's alluding to. There could be, it could be that we decide, oh, we need to have a larger project than 9.6 million because there are things that have to get done. Like they're beyond their useful life. And we could certainly go out with a 10.6 million or $11.6 million project if we needed to. That's going to mean that we have to add debt load. And we would go into that with open eyes. We would recognize, there's some other things we need to get done. And we're explaining to the community that it isn't going to just be replacing the $172,000 mortgage. It's going to be, a $210,000 mortgage or whatever it would end up being. But you go into that knowing that there's the benefit of spending the dollars, but then there's also the responsibility to spend them.
Thank
Okay,
you.
any other questions? Okay, moving on to recognition. Michelle, you got anything there?
I sure do.
Oh, good.
Two really exciting things have happened in the last couple of weeks. I know a couple of you were able to and may want to chime in to join me in listening to our students who are currently engaged in independent studies and with Tyler Cooper, and we're ready to give their presentations. And this is a listing of the amazing individuals that gave their presentations on this particular evening. I know there's other students doing independent study, and a lot of these students will actually be continuing this semester with the research that they're doing. And I know there will be more amazing presentations to come. So we heard some incredible stuff from Taylor Smith and Ryan Warden and Mason Grebe, Corey Kangemi, Peggy Morocco, Brooklyn Finardi, and Annie Kammer. I was completely blown away. I think I always am when I listen to the kids present, but so well researched, so articulate. And I have to say that the connections they're making with professionals, the research they're doing about career fields, to me is life-changing for them. So awesome job to these amazing kids and their inspiring teacher, Tyler Cooper.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in too. I was able to watch the presentation, and it was incredible. It was so impressive that it was definitely college level, even maybe graduate level work that these kids were presenting. Their research was so impressive, and not only that, but their passion for their topic. Every student really talked about why they chose the topic that they chose and what it meant to them, and it was really, really impressive. And Tyler Cooper did a really nice job guiding the kids, and it was a range of topics that they talked on. So it was great.
Cool.
Yeah, Mike McCullough was able to join too, and at one point he commented that there was a little theme because we were learning a lot about knee replacements. So that there's kids thinking about knee replacements, and honestly learning about the technology for some of these surgeries was just amazing. I mean, there were a lot of other great things too, but that was funny that so many kids were looking at surgeries and knee replacements. We also have a very exciting project that's been happening over the course of, I would say, at least the last month. Kate Shanahan, who, if you don't know her, she lives in our community, and she also is our wonderful DMS library media specialist. And Shannon Famano, who is an art teacher here at DMS. They have joined on a project that they're using as a way to recognize frontline workers, and they've targeted the Peregrine. If you know of the Peregrine, you can see it on the way to the valley. It's an assisted living and nursing home facility, and they focus on memory care. And one of our esteemed residents who recently passed away, Mr. Jim Reagan, was at the Peregrine, and they felt like after learning about his legacy that they wanted to focus their efforts on that particular facility to start in honor of him, and also the amazing men and women that care for our elderly in that facility. So they've decided to create clay heart pins that they can provide to these essential workers. And it's really been a team effort. So the art classes and student council have been creating the clay hearts and turning them into pins and glazing them. And the fourth, fifth, and sixth grade classes have been writing these beautiful letters of appreciation to the medical workers in the facility for their patience, caring, wisdom, and love. So the letters are just incredible. And then the DMS Student Council has taken on the project of bagging up the pins with a poem that's included, the letters that the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders have written, and a little extra added treat, some chocolate hearts. So the goal for Kate and Shannon is to take the kids on a field trip so that even if they have to do it outside and ask the workers to come out and be recognized, we all believe in the importance of the impact of the kids seeing this project through to fruition by awarding these pins and letters to the essential workers at the Peregrine Senior Living Center. So hopefully that will happen not too long. They also made extras, and staff members can purchase one of the pins for a nominal fee. And it's really just to help them pay for the cost of the supplies, like the chocolates and, you know, the clay that they're using to defray that cost. So I meant to run down and get one tonight because I've been eyeing up a few of them, and I forgot I didn't put a pin on today. So I thought this is going to be perfect. But of course, my day got away from me. But I will have one of these pins soon. And certainly if any of you wish to acquire one of these pins, I would be happy to grab one for you because they really are lovely and a great reminder of what's important during this time. And so just a reminder, I'm sure you all know that Jim Reagan, obviously longtime community member, business owner, and one of our board members in the past. And, you know, he resided at the Peregrine, which is, as I mentioned before, gave the kids an opportunity to honor his memory because they have become aware that Jim's sons have honored him annually by making a donation to the Helping Hand Fund. And they know that there are students here in their midst that are benefiting from the opportunities provided by the Reagan family in honor of Jim. So I thought this is just lovely and a testament to these two amazing staff members, you know, Kate and Shannon, and the way that they're really engaging kids in a true community service. So kudos to all of them. I'm thrilled to see this come to fruition.
Michelle, I would love for, you know, when we have when the kids are able to go, whatever they arrange in that, and when their efforts are complete and they hopefully can go to Peregrine, I would love to see some news coverage on that event because, you know, it's so great when you see things like this happening out in the communities. And, you know, I think this is a great idea and I applaud everybody involved and agree. It's a great tribute to the Reagan family and just to, you know, the healthcare workers that have done so much and what fun for the kids. So I would love to see that get some news coverage if we can make that arrangement.
100%. I think Kate actually was not even dreaming it would be possible to field trip over there. And I said, oh yes, this is an important part of the process. There's no reason we can't take, you know, even do it over the course of a couple days when different people might be working. And that way more kids can participate. So I haven't cycled back since we hatched that dream, but I will try to get something set a little bit more in stone, and we for sure will get some news coverage. This is a great feel-good story.
Definitely. That's very cool. Okay. Moving on. Are there any residents' comments?
There are none.
There are none.
Okay. Moving on to 7.1, item point 7, business. 7.1, approval of Smart Schools Investment Plan. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the Smart Schools Investment Plan. May I have a motion, please?
Motion, Mike.
Okay. Second?
Second, Janine.
Any questions on this? All in favor?
Aye, Janine.
Hi, Christine.
Kelly, I.
Mike, aye.
And I for me too. Okay, motion, no, that's everybody that was here. Motion carried. 7.2, adoption of new textbook for 2021-2022 school year. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the adoption of the following textbook: World History, SAVVAS 2021 edition, social studies. May I have a motion?
Kelly, motion.
Second, Janine.
Okay. Any questions about this?
Be very interesting to see what they include in this textbook over the
Yeah,
last
really.
I don't know how much of it, if it's published in 2020, I'm sure for a 2021 edition. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see what they've added.
Yep.
The great part about so many textbooks now, and the thing that drew us to this one, is that they have a significant online
Yep.
component. And I think that allows them to be a little bit more timely, but it's definitely more timely than our 12-year-old book that we're currently using. So
I think so. Any other questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye, Janine.
Hi, Christine.
Kelly, I.
Mike, aye.
And Patty, aye. Motion carried. Approval of modified winter sports. Resolved that the Board of Education hereby authorizes the superintendent to allow student participation in the following school sports beginning February 13th, 2021. Subject to the development and compliance with the preparedness plan for the school, each sport, including men's and women's modified basketball and modified wrestling. May I have a motion?
Kelly, motion.
Second?
Christine.
Any questions about that one? Okay, all in favor?
Janine, aye.
Christine.
Kelly, I.
Christine, I.
Mike, aye.
And aye for Patty. Motion carried. All right, moving on to item 8, personnel. Resolved that the following personnel items be approved, and there is a list of them there. May I have a motion, please?
Motion, Janine.
Second? There.
Sorry. Second.
Sorry.
Christine.
Gotcha, Christine. Any questions on that? All in favor?
Janine, aye.
Kelly, I.
Christine.
I got Kelly and Christine,
Mike, aye.
and aye for me. Motion carried. Consent agenda. Resolved that the consent agenda consisting of the following items be approved. And again, you may read those. May I have a motion, please?
Motion, Mike.
A second?
Kelly, second.
Any questions on those? Okay, all in favor?
Janine, aye.
Kelly, I.
Mike, aye.
Aye.
Got you both.
Yep.
And aye for me. Any nays? Motion carried. Information items, board meeting format status. I'm assuming this is on here just so that we know what we're doing.
we do, we're still virtual through March. You know that at any point we can make an adjustment. I think it's working okay so far at this point.
Okay. Anybody have anything else about that? I'm assuming there's still no comments.
Still no comments.
Okay. Item 12.1, enter executive session. Resolve that the meeting in public be adjourned and executive session be convened for the purpose of discussion of collective negotiations. May I have a motion?
Motion, Janine.
Second?
Mike,
Mike, second. All in favor?
Janine, aye.
Christine, I.
Kelly, I.
Mike, aye.
And aye for me. No nays, motion carried. So we are going into executive